I grew up hearing the same phrase over and over again: you'll never make it on your own. It wasn't whispered by strangers or muttered by teachers, it was spat at me by my own family. My parents and older siblings treated me like the family failure, the kid destined to end up broke, begging for scraps. Every time I shared an idea or dream, they'd laugh, call me useless, and remind me how much smarter, more capable, more realistic they were. When I left home at 19 with nothing but a second-hand laptop and a duffel bag, they predicted I'd come crawling back within 6 months. They even placed bets on it. But here's what they didn't count on: I kept every insult, every smirk, every dismissal filed away like ammunition. And when the moment finally came, the moment I built something real, something undeniable, I didn't just prove them wrong. I made sure they would never forget it. Because now, every single one of them works under me. And I run my company with the same cold precision they once used to tear me down. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 32 years old now, CEO of a mid-sized logistics technology company with operations across 3 states. But the story I need to tell doesn't start here. It begins 13 years ago, the night I walked out of my parents' house for the last time. At 19, I was the family failure. My father, Robert, ran a plumbing supply business that had been in his family for 2 generations. My mother, Elaine, worked the books for him, though she liked to call herself the co-director. My older brother, Greg, was the golden child, already slotted to inherit the business. My sister, Laura, was the responsible one, halfway through a nursing degree at the time. Me? I was the dreamer. That was their word for it. What they meant was lazy, unfocused, a disappointment. That night, I'd come home late from a shift bussing tables at a diner off Route 19. My shoes still reeked of fryer oil, and my uniform was stiff with soda syrup. I walked through the back door around 1 a.m., careful not to wake anyone. But the kitchen light was already on. They were waiting for me. My father sat at the head of the table, his tie still on though he hadn't worked in hours. My mother was to his right, arms crossed. Greg leaned against the fridge like a cop at an interrogation. Laura sat with her phone out, scrolling like this whole thing bored her. My father's first words were clipped. "You can't keep living here like this, Dan. No rent, no contribution, no plan." I tried to tell him I was saving, that the diner job was temporary while I worked on something bigger. He cut me off with a laugh. "Bigger? What? You think you're some kind of Bill Gates? You can't even keep your grades up in community college." Greg smirked. "I give him 6 months. He'll be back on his knees." Laura didn't even look up from her phone. 3 months. Tops. And my mother, always the sharpest blade in the drawer, delivered the final cut: "You were a mistake, Daniel. A drain on this family. The sooner you figure out you're not special, the better." I stood there, every muscle stiff, my duffel bag still slung over my shoulder from my shift. And I realized, in that moment, I wasn't welcome in my own home anymore. I didn't argue. Didn't beg. I just walked upstairs, packed what little I owned, 3 pairs of jeans, some thrift store shirts, my second-hand Toshiba laptop, and walked out the door. My father's voice followed me down the driveway. "Don't come crawling back when you fail. Because you will fail." The words lodged themselves in my chest like a stone. I carried that weight for years, and as much as it crushed me at the time, it also hardened into something else, something I didn't fully recognize until much later. Fuel. The first 6 months after I left home were the hardest of my life. I didn't have savings, didn't have friends wealthy enough to crash with, and I sure as hell didn't have a plan. What I had was a duffel bag, a 20-year-old Toshiba laptop that wheezed every time I opened a browser, and about $218 in my checking account. I lived in motels off the interstate, those places with faded carpets and buzzing neon signs where the sheets always smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes. When I couldn't afford a room, I slept in the back booth of the diner where I worked, curled up against cracked vinyl until the morning shift kicked me out. I kept my things locked in a school-sized locker at the bus station downtown, feeding quarters into it day after day because losing that duffel meant losing everything. The work was brutal. Double shifts bussing tables, cleaning grease traps, unclogging toilets customers had destroyed in drunken messes. The paychecks came in paper envelopes, crinkled with sweat and grease before I even opened them. I stretched every dollar: 10-pack ramen for $2.39, peanut butter jars that lasted a week, gas station coffee for 79 cents when I needed to stay awake. There were nights I thought about quitting. Not quitting the job, quitting altogether. I'd sit outside on cracked concrete steps, smoking a borrowed cigarette, staring at the stars through the haze of parking lot lights, and wonder if Greg was right. If Laura's bet would come true. But something stubborn inside me kept moving. Maybe it was pride. Maybe rage. Maybe just the memory of my father's voice telling me I'd come crawling back. Whatever it was, I refused to give him that satisfaction. So I started teaching myself things. Nights when I couldn't sleep, I sat in that motel room with my wheezing laptop, stealing Wi-Fi from the fast food joint next door. I devoured tutorials on coding, logistics systems, and small business operations. Free PDFs. YouTube walkthroughs. Anything. I kept notebooks filled with scrawled diagrams, system maps, mock-up budgets for businesses that didn't exist. I was exhausted, underfed, and one missed paycheck away from sleeping on the street, but in that cracked vinyl booth, hunched over a $40 laptop with a flickering battery, I felt a flicker of something my family had never given me, possibility. And one night, while scrolling a forum about supply chain management, I stumbled onto an idea so simple, so obvious, it made my pulse quicken. A tool that small businesses could actually use. A gap no one seemed to be filling. It wasn't a business yet. It wasn't even a plan. But it was a spark. And sparks, I was starting to learn, can survive even in the darkest places. The idea came to me at 2 a.m, sitting on a sagging motel mattress with my laptop balanced on my knees. I'd been scrolling through forums about supply chain management, not because I had any business doing so, but because I'd started noticing something at the diner. Every week, the manager cursed about late deliveries, missing invoices, and suppliers double charging. I watched him shuffle paper receipts into a shoebox, trying to track food costs with nothing but highlighters and post-it notes. I didn't know much about logistics, but even I could see it was chaos. That night, on the forum, someone posted, "Small business inventory tools are either too expensive or too clunky. There's nothing built for shops or restaurants under 20 employees." Something clicked. I grabbed my notebook, flipped past pages filled with half-baked schemes, and wrote in block letters. Affordable inventory plus delivery tracker for small businesses. I wasn't a coder, not really. But I knew enough HTML and Python basics from free tutorials to scrape together prototypes. I downloaded open source templates, tore them apart, stitched them back together. The motel Wi-Fi kicked me off every hour, so I kept reconnecting, sweating over lines of code until my eyes burned. By day, I hauled trash and wiped ketchup off tables. By night, I built. Slowly, clumsily, but obsessively. The first prototype was ugly, gray boxes, glitchy buttons, reports that crashed if you hit refresh too fast. But when I showed it to the diner manager, his eyes widened. "Wait, you mean I could plug in our weekly orders and it would auto-track against invoices?" It wasn't ready for real-world use, but the reaction was enough to keep me going. Enough to convince me I might be onto something. Of course, I kept it secret from my family. I hadn't spoken to them since the night I left, but I knew how it would go if I told them. Greg would call it a hobby. Laura would laugh. My mother would sneer. My father would tell me to quit wasting time and go work for Greg's business. No. This was mine. And for once, I wasn't going to hand it over for ridicule. I started keeping meticulous records, timestamps of every prototype version, receipts for every tiny purchase, like the $9.99 domain name I scraped together tips to buy, even screenshots of forum posts where I'd ask questions. Something in me knew I needed a paper trail, not just to track progress, but to protect it. Because one day, if I got this right, people would come for it. Maybe even my own blood. But for now, all I had was a flickering screen, a motel desk sticky with spilled soda, and an idea that refused to die. The first time I tried to pitch my idea, I walked into a small business loan office in a thrift store blazer that still smelled faintly of mothballs. I had a binder full of mock-ups I'd printed at the public library, and I rehearsed my lines the whole bus ride there. The loan officer barely glanced at the first page before closing the binder. "No collateral, no degree, no track record. We can't help you." That was the beginning of what I started calling the wall of no. I heard it everywhere. At banks. At startup incubators. From landlords when I tried to rent even the smallest office space. The pattern was always the same: polite smiles, skeptical looks, then the door shutting in my face. Some were blunt. "You're too young." Others were cruel. "Come back when you're not a kid playing CEO." I kept every rejection letter, every email, every voicemail. I printed them, stacked them in a manila folder labeled proof. I didn't know why yet, but something told me to archive the ridicule the way my father's words had burned themselves into me. Money was the biggest problem. I kept bussing tables at the diner, sometimes pulling 18-hour shifts. I grabbed freelance gigs off Craigslist, building basic websites for local pawn shops and auto repair guys, writing product descriptions for shady eBay sellers, even editing resumes for people who barely spoke English. The jobs paid next to nothing, but I funneled every dollar I could into my project. When I finally scraped together enough to hire a real coder on an overseas freelance site, the guy ran off with half my payment. Lesson learned. I built the next version myself. The thing about being told no 100 times is that eventually you stop hearing it as rejection. You start hearing it as noise. Static. Something to push through. Still, the doubt crept in at night. I'd sit in the dark motel room, the hum of the air conditioner rattling against the wall, and hear my brother's voice in my head. 6 months. He'll be back on his knees. 6 months had passed. Barely. I wasn't crawling yet, but I was close. Then, one afternoon, while bussing a booth sticky with syrup, I overheard 2 restaurant owners complaining about their suppliers. Wrong orders. No tracking. Wasted money. I slid a paper napkin across the table with my name and number scrawled on it. I'm building something that could help with that, I said. They laughed. But one of them pocketed the napkin anyway. That night, I wrote in my notebook, door number 101 doesn't have to slam. Momentum didn't come all at once. It came in splinters. A free trial here, a skeptical yes there. The restaurant owner who pocketed my napkin eventually called. His name was Martin, ran a 24-hour diner 2 towns over. His supplier invoices were a mess, stacked in milk crates behind the counter. I offered to set him up for free, just to test the system. For 3 weeks, I spent every spare hour customizing the prototype for him. I sat in his back office, really just a broom closet with a desk jammed in it, typing until my fingers cramped, coding between orders of fries. When Martin saw the system spit out his first clean, itemized report, his jaw slackened. Kid. If this actually works, you might be onto something. That was the first validation I ever got. It wasn't a paycheck, but it was proof. From there, I hustled nonstop. Craigslist jobs during the day, coding at night, coffee by the gallon. My notebooks filled with ideas, cost breakdowns, even lists of competitors I studied like playbooks. Every dime I made went back into the system, hosting fees, a slightly better laptop, some cheap cloud storage. The grindstone years taught me how to operate on fumes. I learned to live on $20 a week for food. To sleep 4 hours and still drag myself to work. To negotiate everything, rent, software, even bus fares. Every penny became a soldier, marching toward the one war that mattered. Survival long enough to get this system off the ground. And through it all, I never once called my family. Not on holidays, not on birthdays. I let their silence hang like a dare. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I imagined them at family dinners, mentioning my name with smirks. Dan's probably broke by now. Living under a bridge. Told you so. Good. Let them think it. The longer they underestimated me, the better. By year 2, I had a handful of small businesses using my system. Not paying much, some just covering my costs, but enough to prove it wasn't a fluke. Enough to build a track record. Still, I stayed quiet. No social media. No big announcements. Just grind, polish, and document. I kept the proof folder updated too, adding not only rejection letters but also invoices, emails, changelogs. I didn't realize it yet, but I was building a weapon, a paper trail no one could erase. It was exhausting. Lonely. Brutal. But beneath the fatigue, I felt something start to shift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. And soon, the world outside my tiny circle of motels and diners would have no choice but to notice. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sky stayed the color of wet concrete all day. I was hunched over my laptop in a library study carrel, trying to debug a report function that kept spitting out zeros, when my prepaid flip phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional. A woman named Sharon, operations manager for a regional catering chain. She'd gotten my name from Martin, the diner owner. Her tone was skeptical, but urgent. I don't know what you're running, but if it can clean up our supplier mess, I'll pay you for a trial. 6 weeks. Don't waste my time. That trial changed everything. Unlike Martin's single diner, Sharon's company managed dozens of suppliers, hundreds of invoices, across 3 locations. Their books were a swamp of late fees, mismatched orders, and handwritten logs. I spent sleepless nights customizing the system to handle their load, patching code on the fly while nursing gas station coffee. By week 4, they'd cut waste by 17%. By week 6, Sharon signed a 1-year contract. The deposit, wired directly into my checking account, was more money than I'd ever seen at once, $18,750. I stared at the balance on the screen for hours, my hands shaking. For the first time, I wasn't just scraping by. I had capital. I rented a tiny office above a pawn shop, one desk, peeling linoleum floors, a single buzzing fluorescent light. To anyone else, it was a dump. To me, it was headquarters. But I didn't broadcast the win. Not yet. I still remembered every word my family had spit at me, and I wasn't ready to tip my hand. Instead, I built smoke screens. I told acquaintances I was still freelancing websites, kept my LinkedIn profile blank, avoided the kind of online bragging that might filter back to my parents or siblings. In the shadows, though, I documented everything. Contracts. Version updates. Bug reports. Every invoice and wire transfer. I kept backups on encrypted drives, printed hard copies, and stored duplicates in off-site lockboxes I rented under a different name. Because deep down, I knew the moment I revealed myself, the vultures would circle. Not just competitors, but family. The same people who told me I was worthless. And I wanted to be ready. For now, though, I worked. I hired 2 part-time coders through careful vetting. I reinvested every dime. My office stayed bare, no fancy furniture, no big signs, just a war room where the grind continued. But behind the peeling walls and buzzing lights, the empire was no longer just an idea. It was real. And for the first time, I wasn't just fighting to survive. I was laying the groundwork to strike back. Success is quieter than people think. At least at first. There was no champagne, no cheering, no press release. Just numbers creeping upward in spreadsheets, and a phone that rang more often than it used to. Sharon's referral opened the door to 3 more contracts. Word spread, but not in headlines, in whispers between managers tired of drowning in paper. My software didn't have a name yet, just a clean interface and functions that actually worked. That was enough. Within a year, I had 10 clients. Within 2, I had 30. Revenues cracked 6 figures. The office above the pawn shop couldn't hold us anymore. I moved into a warehouse space by the river, exposed brick, drafty windows, the smell of rusted steel and river water seeping through the floorboards. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me room to grow. I hired carefully. Coders who'd been burned by bigger firms. Admins who knew how to stretch budgets. A sales guy who was tired of pushing junk software and wanted to sell something that worked. Each new hire signed ironclad NDAs. Every workstation ran monitoring software. Every login had audit trails. I'd been burned before, and I wasn't going to let it happen again. And always, I kept the paper trails. Contracts filed in duplicate. Emails archived with timestamps. Even hallway conversations sometimes backed up with follow-up notes. Paranoia? Maybe. But paranoia kept me alive. Then, one evening while reviewing resumes for a new operations role, a name froze me mid-scroll. Greg Mercer. My brother. The golden child. The heir apparent to my father's business. The same man who had smirked and bet 6 months on my failure. I checked the resume twice to be sure. There it was, his old job title, Operations Manager, Mercer Plumbing Supply. And beneath it, in smaller print, Company dissolved, 2020. I laughed. Out loud. The sound echoed in the empty warehouse. Curiosity sent me down a rabbit hole. Public records. Business filings. Local news blurbs. My father's company had gone under 18 months earlier. Debt, mismanagement, shrinking market share. They'd tried to pivot online too late. Creditors had stripped it to the studs. Greg hadn't mentioned a word. Not to me, of course, we hadn't spoken in over a decade, but not publicly either. His resume was dressed up, polished, but I could see the cracks. And suddenly, I realized something. They were circling back. My family. The very people who'd thrown me out, laughed at me, bet on my failure. Now, they needed me. I didn't move fast. I tightened the net slowly. I expanded hiring ads in their area, posted openings with baited descriptions that matched their skill sets. Roles just beneath the level of authority they'd once boasted about, positions they could swallow their pride to apply for, because desperation erodes arrogance faster than anything. And when their resumes began to trickle in, one after another, I archived them carefully. Like trophies. Because the hunt had officially begun, the resumes came in one by one, like ghosts from a past I'd buried. First Greg, of course. Then Laura. She had left nursing years earlier, apparently burned out, bouncing through administrative jobs that all seemed to end badly. Her resume painted it as career exploration. I read between the lines: instability, desperation. 2 weeks later, an application from my mother, Elaine Mercer. She'd listed herself as a financial consultant, though the only experience on the page was bookkeeping for my father's defunct company. The phrasing was desperate, bloated. I could almost hear her voice in every line: I deserve this. I am owed this. My father's name never appeared. Pride, maybe. Or maybe he was too far gone. Bankruptcy filings had stripped him clean. I found a foreclosure notice attached to the old house where I'd grown up. For a moment, I sat there staring at the applications, remembering the night they'd cornered me at the kitchen table, my duffel bag at my feet. Their voices layered over each other, taunts and dismissals. You'll never make it. You're not special. You'll crawl back. Now, here they were, crawling to me. I drafted the invitation emails myself. Professional, clipped, no hint of recognition. Subject: interview invitation, Mercer Technologies. Dear applicant, thank you for applying to the operations team position at Mercer Technologies. We are pleased to invite you to an interview at our headquarters. Please reply to confirm availability. Regards. Daniel Mercer, CEO, Mercer Technologies. I didn't disguise the name. I wanted the shock to hit them the moment they read it. My name, in the signature block. The same name they'd spat out 13 years ago. I imagined the silence around their dinner tables when those emails arrived. The frozen screens. The hard swallows. They all accepted. Greg wrote back within 15 minutes, overly enthusiastic, absolutely thrilled at the opportunity. I've always admired what you're building. A lie so transparent it was almost insulting. Laura's reply came a day later, careful, polite, as though addressing a stranger. My mother waited 3 days. Her response was curt, borderline cold: I am available for an interview. No acknowledgement. No warmth. But the fact she'd replied at all told me what I needed to know. I scheduled them back to back. Same day. Same conference room. Each would face me, one by one, across a table they never thought I'd sit at, let alone own. And I made sure the cameras were ready. The room was wired with discrete audio and video recording, standard for HR, officially, but in this case, far more useful. The net wasn't just tightening anymore. It was about to close. The morning of the interviews, I arrived early. The conference room was spare, glass walls, a long oak table, a single monitor humming at one end. Sunlight cut across the floor, sharp and cold. I checked the recording system twice. Audio clean. Cameras angled just right. At 9 a.m. sharp, Greg walked in. Same square jaw, same inflated swagger, but his suit didn't fit right, creased at the shoulders, a half-inch too long in the sleeves. He tried to play it cool. "Danny boy," he said, forcing a grin. "Look at you. Big man in charge now." "Greg," I answered evenly. "Please, have a seat." The interview began like any other. I asked about his past experience. He rattled off jargon, inflating his role at my father's business, blaming market trends for its collapse. Never once admitting his own mismanagement. The arrogance was intact, but thinner now, frayed at the edges. Finally, I asked, "Why do you want this job?" He paused, forced a laugh. "Well, I figured. Family should stick together, right?" I let the silence hang. His smile faltered. The cameras caught it all, the cracks in his performance, the desperation beneath the bravado. At 10:15, it was Laura's turn. She entered with a brittle smile, her hair tied back too tight, her resume trembling slightly in her hands. She spoke in soft, measured tones, framing her job hopping as adaptability. I pressed on details: why she left nursing, why 3 employers listed her as terminated. Her voice wavered. Excuses spilled out: unfair bosses, toxic environments, miscommunication. Never her fault. When I asked why she was interested in logistics software, she answered flatly: because it's stable. Not passion. Not vision. Just survival. The camera recorded every word. Then came my mother. Elaine. She entered like she owned the place, her perfume arriving 2 seconds before she did. She didn't sit until I gestured. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the company logo on the wall, Mercer Technologies. My name. "You've done well for yourself," she said, like it was an accusation. "Thank you," I replied, my tone neutral. Her answers were curt, defensive. She leaned on decades of experience balancing books, dismissing my questions as unnecessary. At one point she scoffed, "I think we both know I'm overqualified for this role." But then, the slip. When I asked why Mercer Plumbing collapsed, she stiffened. Your father trusted the wrong people. We were undermined. If Greg had been given more support. The camera caught it, the refusal to admit failure, the rewriting of history, the quiet attempt to shift blame. By noon, all 3 interviews were done. I saved the files, duplicated them, encrypted the copies. Evidence, neatly archived. The trap was sprung. They had come to me willingly, exposed their hypocrisy on record, and now stood exactly where I wanted them, beneath me, needing me, oblivious to just how carefully I was documenting their downfall. I leaned back in my chair, watching the empty conference room on the monitor, and allowed myself the smallest of smiles. The real game was about to begin. I hired them all. Not into glamorous roles, not into positions of authority, but into the lowest rungs of my operation, jobs tailored with precision to dismantle the pedestals they'd once stood on. Greg, the would-be heir to my father's empire, became a logistics coordinator. It sounded impressive on paper, but in practice it meant spreadsheets, cold calls to suppliers, and answering to a supervisor 10 years younger than him. Every task tracked, every deadline time-stamped. I made sure the chain of command placed him 3 steps below where he thought he belonged. Laura landed in customer support. Headset on, script in front of her, every call monitored for quality assurance. Gone were the days of walking out of jobs when things got hard. Now, every word was recorded, every metric measured. Her adaptability was pinned down to numbers she couldn't argue with. And my mother, Elaine, the self-proclaimed financial mastermind, was hired as a junior accounts assistant. Not a manager. Not even a supervisor. Just another cog in the accounting department, where she reconciled invoices under the watchful eye of a woman half her age. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who once told me I was a mistake now spent her days entering numbers into a system I had built from scratch. Of course, they resisted. Greg bristled at being corrected by younger colleagues. Laura's voice cracked under angry customer calls. My mother sent me a scathing email within the first week. I think there's been a mistake in the level of my placement. I replied with a single sentence, all roles are assigned based on experience and fit. Meanwhile, the monitoring systems hummed quietly in the background. Every login, every file accessed, every keystroke was logged. I wasn't just employing them, I was documenting them. Their mistakes, their complaints, their cracks under pressure. I watched it all from my office, glass walls overlooking the floor below. I kept my distance, letting the supervisors handle discipline, but I made sure my presence was felt. A nod in the hallway, a silent glance across the conference room, a signature on their paychecks. Constant reminders that the power had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. Some nights, as the office emptied and the lights dimmed, I lingered at my desk, reviewing the footage from their interviews. Watching Greg squirm, Laura stammer, my mother rewrite history. Each clip was a weapon, polished and waiting. Because this wasn't the endgame. Not yet. Hiring them was just stage 1. Stage 2 was exposure. And when that came, the entire community, the same neighbors, acquaintances, and business owners who once nodded along to my family's mockery, would see the truth. Not just that I had succeeded, but that they had failed. On my terms, the exposure didn't come from me, not directly. That was the brilliance of it. I knew better than to gloat. Better than to post some triumphant announcement online. That wasn't my style. I wanted something that couldn't be traced back to me, something undeniable and organic. The first spark came from inside. An employee in HR, loyal, competent, and discreet, approached me with a question about the 3 new hires who seemed to have unusual scrutiny on their files. I gave her the green light to share limited details with her professional network. A quiet seed planted in the right soil. Within weeks, the whispers started. On LinkedIn. In industry forums. At local business mixers. People noticed the irony. Greg Mercer, once the arrogant heir of Mercer Plumbing, now answering phones as a mid-level coordinator at Mercer Technologies. Laura Mercer, reduced to reading scripts in a call center. Elaine Mercer, crunching numbers at a desk she didn't control. Then came the journalist. Her name was Carla Mendez, a business reporter with a nose for hypocrisy. She reached out one Friday afternoon. Daniel, I've been hearing stories about your company, and your family. I'd like to confirm a few things. I didn't hand her the recordings. Not yet. I didn't need to. Instead, I gave her the basics, employment confirmations, job descriptions, contracts, all public record if you knew where to look. She did the digging herself, cross-referencing bankruptcy filings, foreclosure notices, old trade articles about Mercer Plumbing. She pulled the threads, and soon the tapestry unraveled. The article hit 2 weeks later. Headline: From family outcast to tech CEO, Daniel Mercer's quiet revenge. It wasn't sensational. It was factual, clinical. It laid out the story in bulletproof detail: the rise and fall of Mercer Plumbing, the mockery I endured, the software empire I had built, and the bitter irony of my family now working under me. The article went viral in our community. Business forums lit up. Former neighbors shared the link. Old acquaintances resurfaced, some sending congratulatory emails, others just stunned silence. My family, of course, reacted with fury. Greg stormed into my office demanding a retraction. Laura cried in the stairwell. My mother refused to make eye contact for days. But it didn't matter. The story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the public record. The same mouths that once ridiculed me now whispered my name with respect. Investors who had ignored my emails years earlier were suddenly calling. Opportunities doubled overnight. And my family had no escape. Their humiliation wasn't a private shame, it was documented, archived, and broadcast. Not because I shouted, but because I had built the trap carefully enough that the world exposed them for me. All I had to do was sit back, hands folded, and watch. The exposure didn't come from me, not directly. That was the brilliance of it. I knew better than to gloat. Better than to post some triumphant announcement online. That wasn't my style. I wanted something that couldn't be traced back to me, something undeniable and organic. The first spark came from inside. An employee in HR, loyal, competent, and discreet, approached me with a question about the 3 new hires who seemed to have unusual scrutiny on their files. I gave her the green light to share limited details with her professional network. A quiet seed planted in the right soil. Within weeks, the whispers started. On LinkedIn. In industry forums. At local business mixers. People noticed the irony: Greg Mercer, once the arrogant heir of Mercer Plumbing, now answering phones as a mid-level coordinator at Mercer Technologies. Laura Mercer, reduced to reading scripts in a call center. Elaine Mercer, crunching numbers at a desk she didn't control. Then came the journalist. Her name was Carla Mendez, a business reporter with a nose for hypocrisy. She reached out one Friday afternoon. Daniel, I've been hearing stories about your company, and your family. I'd like to confirm a few things. I didn't hand her the recordings. Not yet. I didn't need to. Instead, I gave her the basics: employment confirmations, job descriptions, contracts, all public record if you knew where to look. She did the digging herself, cross-referencing bankruptcy filings, foreclosure notices, old trade articles about Mercer Plumbing. She pulled the threads, and soon the tapestry unraveled. The article hit 2 weeks later. Headline: From family outcast to tech CEO, Daniel Mercer's quiet revenge. It wasn't sensational. It was factual, clinical. It laid out the story in bulletproof detail: the rise and fall of Mercer Plumbing, the mockery I endured, the software empire I had built, and the bitter irony of my family now working under me. The article went viral in our community. Business forums lit up. Former neighbors shared the link. Old acquaintances resurfaced, some sending congratulatory emails, others just stunned silence. My family, of course, reacted with fury. Greg stormed into my office demanding a retraction. Laura cried in the stairwell. My mother refused to make eye contact for days. But it didn't matter. The story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the public record. The same mouths that once ridiculed me now whispered my name with respect. Investors who had ignored my emails years earlier were suddenly calling. Opportunities doubled overnight. And my family had no escape. Their humiliation wasn't a private shame, it was documented, archived, and broadcast. Not because I shouted, but because I had built the trap carefully enough that the world exposed them for me. All I had to do was sit back, hands folded, and watch.